1938, northeast of Baird on a farm. And my parents, I had very nice parents, and I don't remember hardly any of my growing up before I was 8 years old. I don't know why. I think my memory that was a very nice time, very enjoyable time. My brothers were teaching me how to run. They thought I was fast, and they were teaching me how to run. Well, then in 1946, in January, I had polio. My folks thought it was the flu. I was sick, I had a fever. Took me to a doctor, and they said probably had the flu. One morning I woke up in bed about 2 or 3 days into the flu, but one morning I woke up and I felt great, but I couldn't get out of bed. My left side was paralyzed. Well, they took me back to the doctor, and he said I'd had polio, and my folks knew that because it was obvious. Polio was a very epidemic thing back then, 1946. And anyway, it was right after the war. My folks didn't have a car that would take me much of anywhere. Couldn't get new tires. You couldn't get a car at that time. You had to put your name in for a car. But the doctor said that I had to go to the orthopedic hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska. So he had to get a permit to take me down on the train from Alliance, Nebraska. And they said only one person could go, so my dad went with me. He took me down to the hospital. Didn't know how long I'd be there. Didn't know anything about what was going on. And he took me down there. I remember it was so busy down there, they put me in a baby crib in Lincoln. And my dad stayed around for a day or two, and the doctors finally told him, said he'll be here a long time. We have a lot of things to do. I remember one thing, when I first went in, they put me in an iron lung. I was only in there a short time because I didn't have anything wrong with my lungs. An iron lung is about the size of a 8-inch or an 18-inch culvert. They just shoved you in there, and they had a little glass on top to feed you with. But they took me out of there, and of course put me in a ward. And they started working on my paralysis. One thing, I was left with a paralyzed leg. My left side completely recovered from the waist up. And that's the way polio worked a lot of times. I had enough muscles left, they got those built back up. I was in the hospital 10 months down in Lincoln. My folks came to see me a time or two, but they weren't able to get down there. Well, when I was in the hospital when I was 10 months, there were 4 wards in the hospital. The hospital was about a block long, and there were 4 north and south wards, 2 on the east side, 2 on the west side. And there was a hallway that ran all the way down through the hospital. Well, they put the iron lungs in the hallways. The wards had kids that were paralyzed, that had problems, were on life support, things like that. But the iron lungs pumped. They had like an air compressor inside of them, and they pumped. You could hear them all night long. They'd go, phew, phew, and you could hear those iron lungs all night long. Well, when we'd go to school down there, they took us to school. And when I'd go to school, there was a girl that was in one of the iron lungs, probably about my age. And they'd have her window open in her iron lung once in a while when I'd go to school. And I stopped and got acquainted with her. Her name was Barbara. And one night, after I got pretty well acquainted with her, one night in the middle of the night, there was a lot of commotion. And we'd hear this commotion out there anyway. There'd be nurses and there'd be doctors, and, you know, it was an emergency situation, you could tell that. Well, Barbara died. And that was a pretty tough deal. We were good friends. And I had good friends in the ward too. And one of them died while I was there. So, kind of death was around you, and you knew that. But I did enjoy going to school. They had school in the basement of the hospital because all of us were out of school. We were young, you know, had to go to school. I enjoyed that. But I remember those iron lungs pumped every night. And that was a sound that I'll never forget. One thing I remember when I got out of the hospital and went home, I was homesick for the hospital. I was homesick for my parents for a long time in the hospital, but I was homesick for the hospital. Well, I didn't do very well, I don't think, for a couple years, and we'd go to clinics that were held around this area, Shadron, Alliance, or Scottsbluff. Went to a clinic one day, and this doctor came in and made my mom cry. He said I was really undernourished, it looked like. It wasn't because I just didn't eat, I just didn't like the situation. The doctor said, he told my mom, he said, this kid's got to get to doing something. He's scrawny, he's not eating right. He said, I'm going to put him back in the hospital. So I went back down to Lincoln to the orthopedic hospital.
How old were you?
I was probably about 10 at that time. Well, I went to the hospital room got there. My folks sent me down on a train, and taxi cab picked me up. My parents didn't go with me. Taxi cab picked me up and took me to the hospital. And I think I did that about 3 or 4 different times because I had some surgeries and things. But this time was probably started the change in my life. But the doctor met me at the door. There's a big hospital. It was about a block long. Big hospital down there. And he said, had me come in. Dr. Teal was his name. And the nurse, he said, bring him down to the whirlpool. We're going to get started right now working on him. She took me down to the whirlpool, put me in the whirlpool. Pretty soon Dr. Teal came in. He had shorts on. He had a wooden leg. He took his leg off, got in the whirlpool with me, and started working with me physically. And he had lost his leg in the Alcorn River. He hit a piece of metal, old rusty metal. He was swimming in the Alcorn River, and they had to cut it off. And he told me all about that, and I thought, even then, at 10 years old, I thought, you know, I don't need to be this way. He told me how to get some weights and start lifting weights and start using. He said, your leg will probably always be paralyzed, partially paralyzed. They said it was about 20% of normal. Well, I was able to, went home and I started working, and I started building up physically. I started to eat right. Things started to change. And it's probably because of his inspiration, Dr. Teal's. And then they took me back down, and they operated on my left leg. They put some pig muscles down in my left leg foot. I've got 3 scars on my leg. And as I grew older, and I don't remember what date this is, but they drove, a few years later, they drove staples into my knee to stop the growth of my good leg. They drove the staples in my good leg to stop the growth because it was outgrowing, and I'd have a really severe limp. So I might have been 6'1" if they hadn't done that. But anyway, probably the biggest change in my life I was kind of nasty in high school for 3 years. I wasn't a very nice person to have around. I washed a lot of walls, just being ornery and mischievous and cantankerous, I guess you might call it. Between my junior and senior year, I accepted Christ as my Savior. I accepted Christ in the Assembly of God Church in Baird, had a revival. The evangelist that was preaching was speaking directly to me, and I knew it. Nobody else in there heard it, but several went forward, but nobody else but me. I mean, I thought he was speaking to me. He knew me, he knew my life. The Lord had led that man. But anyway, I started going to church down there. My senior year was a lot better year. I even had some of the kids that I knew, they even said, "Hey, you're different this year." And I was. I was pleasant. I was easier to get along with. I don't know about easy to get along with. And there was a time in my life that I didn't think I'd ever be married. And I just didn't think any girl would go with a boy that had a paralyzed leg. And I was able to walk. When I accepted Christ, I started going to that church. And Pat went to that church. Her parents went to that church. They were very faithful. And we didn't meet right at first, probably, when I first started going there, but we eventually got together. And anyway, we got married in 1960. And that's kind of where that started, we dated for, 2 years? Her dad was very strict. I had to meet her at home. That was all there was to it for a long time. She was pretty young, too.
I guess I thought he was handsome.
Was that the only value I had?
And he was a farmer. My dad was a farmer. And I thought, it couldn't be all bad being a farmer.
When I was a senior in high school, I rented an 80 that was right next to my dad's place. And I started farming that with my dad's machinery. And then my brother Kenny was a farmer. And he had a good line of equipment. And I kind of got started that way. And I rented that 80 until we got married. I rented another 80 before we were married. And when we got married, we farmed both 80s and lived in a house that this was 1960, it didn't have indoor plumbing. And she went along with that, never complained. So I knew I had a jewel right there if you don't have indoor plumbing, But we stayed in that place, 2 years? And we farmed that place and a couple other 80s there, and then we moved over north of Moomaw Corner. We were there quite a few years.
And we had an indoor bathroom. Woohoo!
And then, of course, Dana was born in April. We got married in June. He was born in April. And then Todd was born a couple of years later. Well, Justin, one thing that I learned clear back from Dr. Teal, I learned that my upper body had to handle this. My good leg and my upper body. And I had a doctor tell me, Dr. Friedline, who who is, well, what is his specialty? But anyway, he said my leg and my shoulders had about 120 years on them when I was in my 60s. So, but that's what I had to do. I got up and on and off a tractor with my arms and my good leg. The other one followed along. And like I say, back then I did have 20%. I didn't even use a cane to walk. It would hold me up and help me walk. And I just used the parts of my body that worked good. That's how I farmed. And then we had two boys. And when those guys got maybe not quite old enough to work, they come out and help. They set water. They lived there long enough, and
Like 5 years old?
yeah, 5 years old. They
Driving.
They try to drive at 5. But one of the worst things we ever did was buy a 3-wheeler. That was not good, because I don't know what all they did, but they never did tell me what all
Put
they
it
did.
this way, we're just glad we got 2 sons that are still alive after having a 3-wheeler. I helped. I'd get up and,
She could run every piece of equipment we had, and I knew that.
And was that normal for the time? Did wives
Well,
normally do
wives
that?
did help quite a bit, but she could run a combine if I needed her to, and there were women that could probably run a combine. And one thing that always amazed me about her, we used to have a 4-wheel drive tractor on the front of a grain cart, and she could back that goofy grain cart in the shed if it was going to rain or something, and neither I or the hired man could do that. That was later on in life. We couldn't get it in there, but she was very, very good with farm equipment.
Good.
It wasn't a surprise. I mean, we were happy. We wanted to raise a family. We wanted to raise them on the farm if we could, and Dana and Todd were very, very good helpers on that farm. It made a lot of difference in my workload, and I really appreciated them. They were hard workers, and we've always been so blessed. We have 2 of the best daughter-in-laws in the world. I don't even like to call them daughter-in-laws. They're daughters as far as we're concerned. But both of the boys married very well. It enhanced it very much. Grandkids were very special. And of course we have 1 great-grandchild, and we're gonna have 2 more here pretty soon, and that gets you pretty souped up too. I mean, it's special too. But we've enjoyed our grandchildren. One family lived close to us for quite a few years, and they left, and the other one moved in close to us, so we've had both sides of the grandchildren to kind of grow up with. And we have to grow up with the grandkids too.
Yeah.
Justin, when I got saved at 17, the negativity left. It started before we were married. It started before our boys were born. I was pretty positive about myself. And it was because the Lord was guiding me. And I knew Pat loved the Lord. That's why we got married. And we wanted to raise children that loved the Lord, and we're thankful for that our boys do love the Lord. We followed them in every sport they had as good as we could, and we enjoyed every bit of it. I was on the school board at the time. I got elected to the school board when I was pretty young, and Dana was just in 1st grade or kindergarten or something like that, and I served on a lot of boards throughout my whole life, and the negativity was gone after I got saved. I just wasn't right with the Lord, and He was convicting me all the time. Good. And I just drug my feet until I was 17 years old.
Good.
We've been Gideons since I was 27 years old, and still are. We still belong to the Gideons. I used to go around and give reports for the Gideons. I fell off from a platform down in Sydney, and that's when I had decided I had to quit. Because there's a thing called post-polio syndrome, that this leg has gotten down to where it's nothing left anymore. And that happened in my 70s, which I'm thankful for. It happens to a lot of people in their 40s, 50s. So I'm thankful for that. But the ministries that we've been involved in churches, and I love the Gideon ministry. I love to speak for the Gideons and tell how people got saved just because somebody gave them a Bible or a New Testament. They got saved. And they had a tremendous testimony, and I love to tell that to churches. And Pat was always involved with me, and now we go to a couple, 3 nursing homes, and one of them's an Alzheimer's, completely Alzheimer's, and we enjoy that. It makes us, we talk about it all the way home. You don't know whether they're getting anything, but you see reactions that say, yeah, the Lord's there, even though they don't remember anything. The Lord is still there. I think He still works in their heart. Well, we used to sing together some, and then we had a little group that we sang with, some friends here in town. And I'm not a very good singer. I do sing once in a while a solo at the nursing homes. They haven't thrown me out yet for doing that, but Pat has a gift that only a few people have. When you can sit down and play for 45 minutes and not have to look at a book and play different hymns, play a few old songs like, what's this one, Sweetheart? Let me call you sweetheart. She'll be coming around the mountain. She can play those, and we play a few of those at the nursing home. She can just play anything, and that's only a gift from God, and that's why we decided to go to the nursing homes, because that's God's gift, yeah. And she's as good as she ever was at that. Well, I learned, Pat and I have been married, we'll be married 58 years in June. I've learned that she's the most special thing in my life outside of the Lord. She's number one. My kids they're number 2. My grandkids are number 3. But I just, it's been very special, very special. And I don't know that I learned a lot of wisdom, but I'm so thankful for the Lord for what I still can do. I do it in a wheelchair or a scooter, but that doesn't seem to bother anybody. It doesn't bother me. And I'm thankful for the church we go to and the people in the church. We have a care group in this church that has brought us firewood and willing to help do anything. We're thankful for that. But I don't know. My wisdom came from the Lord. If I had any, it came from the Lord. And I know He could have used me more. He could have used both of us more. I know that.